Welcome to Real Life Counseling, a podcast by the Counseling Corner. I'm David Morello, and I'm sitting in for Ryan Simpson. And today we're talking about something many adults experience, but few feel prepared for. It's grief and loss. Grief isn't just about sadness. It can show up as exhaustion, anxiety, anger, numbness, or feeling disconnected from yourself and ultimately the world around you. And for many adults, grief doesn't follow a timeline or the rules people expect it to. In this episode, we're going to challenge some of the common myths about grief, explore how loss can change who we are, and talk about what grief counseling actually helps with when life has been fundamentally altered by loss. I'm joined by Dr. Reilly, founder of the Counseling Corner, along with Michelle Buchanan and Ale Rios, counselors who work with adults navigating grief every day. Let's start by clearing up some of the biggest misunderstandings about grief. What grief is not is what we're going to call this segment. And the first myth that we're looking at is time heals all wounds. Michelle, do you mind speaking to that?
Sure. First of all, I guess to start, grief is bigger than time, and the loss of your loved one is more than a wound. This phrase, time heals all wounds, I don't know that it really applies oftentimes in the grieving process. And now with that being said, though, of course, we can notice a physical change and a physical reduction in the impact of grief over time. There is healing, and what's really healing is adapting. We're learning through the process of grief to adapt to the loss, to change. We're changing ourselves really through that process. But it's deeper than a wound.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And there's another myth that's kind of prevalent in the space of dealing with grief. And oftentimes it's the statement of if you're still grieving, you're stuck. And do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, my first thought is kind of how grief is not just the loss of a loved one flat out. It's any loss that we experience in our lives. So the loss of life, the loss of relationships, the loss of identity, expectations, career. So grieving shows up differently depending on the phase of life that we're in and what it is that we've lost. And I don't think I've ever met somebody who lost someone that they really cared about in childhood. And as they're reaching old age, they go, "Oh, yeah, I'm done grieving that." Grieving is a lifelong process. It just kind of comes in different phases. And depending on how deep that grief hits us, it's okay to continue to grieve as time goes on. Sometimes that's why anniversaries of that loss kind of hit us harder as the years go on, where it's like, oh, I thought I was doing better. And then all of a sudden my depression came back. And it's right around the time that I lost this loved one, or I lost this part of myself, I lost this ability that I had. Um, so that stuckness, I feel we can give ourselves a little bit of grace when we are feeling a bit stuck. And if we're feeling stuck for a really long time and we want to get out of that feeling, it's okay to reach out and ask for help from our community, from our loved ones, and even from a therapist.
I think that's so powerful because one of the things that I oftentimes find myself sharing with individuals that are going through grief, especially in loss, is that you're about to enter into a whole new world of first that you never asked for. First Thanksgivings, first Christmas, first holidays, first anniversaries, first whatever that you never asked for. And so you've never been there before. And so these emotions, these feelings are going to emerge that you're going to have to process in real time. And sometimes over years, if not dealt with, it happens on a subconscious level. I remember that there were seasons that I just would enter into the fourth quarter and I'd be grieving something that actually was in December. But as soon as I hit September, I'd start feeling a particular kind of way. And I didn't even know because I didn't have words for it at the time. And so I really appreciate that. It's something that takes time. And oftentimes can be experienced afresh in different ways as seasons of life change. Dr. Ernie, there's another myth that's out there which kind of alludes, kind of go hand in hand with this idea is that strong people grieve quietly. What's your response to that?
Yeah, a couple thoughts on that. But first, let me say, like, the reason we grieve is because things matter. So as you were talking, it just reminded me of, like, we're grieving because things really do matter. And so, like, time heals all wounds, as Michelle said, that's really a myth, right? Time doesn't heal all wounds. Healthy grieving helps heal wounds. Healthy grieving does. And as Ali said, grief can look so different for so many people, and being stuck for a while, that's not abnormal. That's normal. If you're stuck for a long time, it may be that your grieving has gotten a little in a way that you could shift it. There may be some things that you could do differently, and you might be able to reach out and get some help. But honoring the fact that grief is there because it matters. So one way that people sometimes don't honor that, right, is they want to be strong,
Mm,
and they believe that strong people grieve quietly, as you were saying. But strong people don't grieve quietly. That's not really what makes grieving uh grief, right? Loud or quiet, right? It's being in touch with your grief, being aware of your grief. It doesn't, if you think of, like, some really tough character in a movie, let's say I think of, because I'm old, like Clint Eastwood, but it may be like Vin Diesel if you're from a certain generation, or someone else from a different generation, right? The different people. Right, right. That would still be old, but I'm like old, right? Right, yeah. So if you think about that character and you think about one, like, let's say we duplicated that person, we cloned them, and there was one version of that person who just stuffs everything down and isn't able to grieve. You see that, a dead family member or a dead child or something, or some loss of some significance, and they just stuff it all down. And now you have the same tough character, but he's able to grieve. Which one's tougher? It seems to me that the one who's able to grieve is actually tougher because he's able to be vulnerable and still tough. So tough isn't about grieving or not grieving. In fact, if anything, grieving, having the ability to grieve makes you tougher because you're acknowledging that something really mattered. So I don't think that that is a true statement that strong people grieve quietly, although some people believe that, and some people believe less of them or less of their hurt or less of these things somehow makes the world a better place, but I just don't think that's true. When we open up and we share more of ourselves and we're able to connect with those things, we're healthier, we do better, right? And I think we're actually stronger when we can do that. So I would say that's a myth for sure.
thank you for sharing that, and I think that that one is really important depending too on your cultural geographic location. I think sometimes family upbringing, causes
Hmm.
people to kind of stuff their feelings in a way that's not healthy, and they've not had individuals modeling what it looks like to live out vulnerably. This grief is what I believe you're articulating and sharing, and so, I I know we kinda introduced this in every episode, but I think that that's why counseling, finding a third party that has the skills, the education, the background, the experience to help find words towards that is super helpful because just even the point that you just made about the fact that you're grieving, it's because something mattered, I think can free a lot of people from the shame of it and the guilt of it, right? Um, Now that we have a better idea of the truth surrounding grief, we can start talking about what is actually happening beneath the surface. And so, Michelle, I want you to consider this question, and then what is this kind of prompt inside of you in terms of reaction? But many adults say that grief doesn't just hurt; it feels like something has shifted within them, like it's changed who they are. Do you find that to be true? And if so, what's going on there?
Sure, sure. That's an excellent question. And I think a lot of people who are grieving feel that way. And I would say that yes, something has shifted inside them. In fact, our brain even feels grief. Sometimes we think about how we feel and we think about our losses. but our bodies do encompass these things and hold them inside. And so, literally, the way that our brain functions changes. Different parts of our brain activates in grief, actually. So, we might find our nucleus accumbens. This is like this little part of the brain that's responsible for kind of interpreting rewards. Well, when, let's say, we have somebody in our life who spent a great deal, a part of our day to day life, there's this reward, right? We're going to
Mm.
come home and we're going to see them. Hey, and we get a hi and we get a hug. And there's this reward. And our brain says, yes, I'm going to look forward to this. And it
Yeah.
appreciates it when it happens. So, this part of our brain, we look for that, we crave it. And so we search for it. And now this person in our life is gone. If we're talking about a person, let's as an example. And now we've lost that person. So our brain is literally searching, wait, where are you? Where have you been? And then there's our amygdala, which is another part of our brain, which kind of activates when we're anxious. And so our amygdala actually says, hey, like there's something wrong here. And it activates our body systems all of a sudden. We maybe can't sleep, might have some mood swings. And then it's of course difficult to concentrate. All of a sudden, people have brain fog. We hear that sometimes people feel like they can't really think straight, and that's such a hard time when sometimes there's a pile of paperwork to get through. There is sometimes administrative duties when there's been a loss. There's processing of thoughts, right? There's talking to people. How do I respond to the people around me? And so, yes, it's very difficult. Something has absolutely shifted within us. But then, imagine if you really think about it, that you've had a routine in your life, and this has just been a part of you, right? Let's say you wake up in the morning and you go get your cup of coffee every day, and this is just what you do. And so many of us understand this. It kind of becomes our balance. It becomes a presence in our day. And imagine how simple it would be to just not have your coffee one morning. And yet that would feel off for us. You can imagine that could even kind of throw us off in the day. And so to have something as major as a person that we're grieving, something certainly has shifted in our life and our day to day, but in our brains too.
Definitely.
Awesome. Dr. Ernie, how does a non-standard grief tend to show up in counseling? And what do people struggle with most when their grief doesn't feel legitimate or recognized by others?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question because we typically think of grief as, like a loved one or something like that. Well, how about when it's a miscarriage? Right?
Mm,
A miscarriage can really hit people quite hard. Or how about when it's a pet and but that pet was maybe the closest person in your life, maybe the only person you ever felt unconditional love from or something like that. And then you lose that pet, that can be super significant. Or how about the grief of a marriage, right? Or the grief of fidelity in a marriage because someone cheated or something, and something's been stolen from you. It's taken. Those are really hard. Or how about this one? Right now I'm working with quite a few people whose children have committed suicide.
mm,
Right. And how do you do that? I had one parent tell me that no one says my child's name,
wow.
right? Because of suicide, right? Nobody says their name because people don't know how to deal with that. Or I have 3 people right now who've lost, jobs after, like, 25, 30 years with a company, putting their heart and soul into something, and then it's taken. Those are all really significant losses that people don't typically think of as grief, or they don't know how to navigate through it. So, it's typically all the normal stuff that you get with grief, right? You're gonna have confusion, self-doubt, shame, all sorts of stuff like that. But you're going to have extra shame. You're going to have more quiet hurt. And then you're going to feel like you're going through it alone because there's very few people. I talked to a woman this week and after our conversation, she said, thank you so much. You're the only person I can talk like this about my son with because her son committed suicide. And so
Mm,
she goes through all these hours and hours and days and can't have conversations talking about her child because of suicide. So those non-standard grief, those are really, really tough. And so if you know someone who's going through it, try to love them. Ask them what would be most helpful for them. Say, I don't really know how to navigate through this. What works for you, what doesn't. That's a lot better than leaving your friend or your loved one alone through this grief. Or if you're going through it, know you're not alone. Get a counselor, get get a support group. There are a lot of other people they can that can say your child's name or can realize that 25 years with a company and then just being let go can really hurt, or miscarriage can devastate you. Sorry to go so long, but that's just a really important.
I'm so glad you brought that up because as we've been talking through this segment, I've been thinking about that, we had only addressed kind of loss in terms of a physical person in our life, but it shows up in so many different ways. Someone being ill, you use, Michelle, you use the idea of having a cup of coffee. And what if you're so sick that you can't even pour your own cup of coffee? There's a grief to that life has just changed, and so there's the
Dementia. Dementia
Demen
is another one.
Oh,
Yeah,
geez, that's a whole episode on a
right,
series of episodes all on its own,
yeah.
and then not only that, but it's how people are responding or reacting to you because of their inability to kind of engage that, which in some ways can re-traumatize and can create additional, challenges, and so thank you for bringing all of those different varieties, but as you're listening to this, just know, and this is the hard part about teaching or examples, is that we want to marry ourselves to the very specific examples and then we believe that our thing doesn't fall within that. No, everything that Ernie was sharing, everything that's been shared today are just examples. It does not minimize what you're going through. And I think that one of the really cool things that Ernie shared was that in the context of a healthy community, people can walk alongside you and help you with that. And then if you don't have that community, you can create a community through counseling. And so I think that's the importance. I'm so tempted to share something. I'm going to share it, and then we'll move on. But I was recently at a literacy event, and this speaker used this language that I thought was so powerful, and it speaks to me about this moment. Is that everyone is born with language, but they're not born with words. Not everyone's born with words. And so grief is a form of language, but you need to find the words of that grief in order to work through it. Or else you're just constantly reacting, and people are reacting to you. And so I'm grateful that some mother is hearing her kid's voice through your voice, Ernie. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you, Michelle, for the work you do. Thank you for the work you do in helping people find words to the grief that they're going through. That was a little off rip there. And I,
Powerful one. Good one, David.
but I have this question for you. People often describe grief as foggy and heavy, exhausting and anxiety provoking. Can you explain what's going on there to the best of your ability? That's a big question. And it's not going to be solved in a couple of minutes worth of answers, but you can help lead us into that space.
Yeah. Without getting into the very, very technical, like the science of it, in simple terms, our mind, our body, our soul, if you believe in that, it's all connected, right? So there's a relationship going on with our thoughts, with our feelings, with the sensations in our body. And I think something Ernie touched on a while ago was how it hurts because we care. It hurts because it really matters. And there is a show called WandaVision where they touch on that. They touch on grief. Line from that show that became viral for a bit after it came out was grief is love persevering. And so when love feels like it has nowhere to go, when the care has
Can you
nowhere
let
to
the
go.
line breathe for a second? I don't want to cut you off. But can you repeat that line for a second? Because I know it's a script from a movie line, but it resonates so true. And I love the fact that you just used a Marvel thing to kind of create an explanation. So, do you mind sharing that line once again?
Yes, so in the show, the line is grief is love persevering.
Mm, that's so
And
good.
so when it
Um,
perseveres, no,
yeah.
you're good. When it perseveres, a lot of times, if it doesn't have an outlet of expression, it can start to become very heavy. And so our anxiety, our worries, our need to fix, it doesn't know what to do with that feeling. It doesn't know what to do with that grief. And so it can just start to cause physical symptoms. It
Mm,
can start to be more than just, I feel an emptiness. I feel a weight on my chest, in my stomach. I feel a weight on my shoulders. A lot of people have said the line, I feel an elephant's foot is on my chest.
mm,
And so these physical sensations are the manifestation of we don't know what to do with these feelings. And something you had touched on earlier, David, you said we need the words to express.
mm,
And sometimes it's not even the words that we need, it is simply that expression that we are seeking, a way for this to kind of come out so that we are not just carrying it all on our own. And a lot of times that shows up in relationships. A lot of us heal through relationships. That's why having an outlet to hear your son's name, to hear your son's voice, to hear a loved one, to connect with a passion that you might have lost, it can feel very healing to reconnect with that when you've lost it. So we can't always connect in ways that we want to, but we can find those outlets of expression in other means.
thank you so much for that. Um, I want to move on to something fairly quick. Is as we were preparing for this episode, we kept coming across the same hesitations people have about grief counseling. They weren't objections so much as fears or assumptions. And I want to name a few of those and ask each of you to help us understand what's actually true. So as we move through these, if you can help me with a short, concise response to the misconceptions. And the first one I will throw to you, Dr. Ernie, is that grief counseling is just talking about the loss over and over and over again.
Yeah, David, that's certainly some people's fear. It's a common fear that's the last thing that they want to do is why would I want to do that? And it's not that grief counseling doesn't talk about the loss. Certainly, there's going to have to be some talking about the loss, but it's done with purpose. It's not done just the idea isn't to talk about it to intensify it. The idea is to talk as needed about it and be honest. The people are talking about it in their head all day long anyway. They may be running from it, but it's chasing them. It's
Mm,
right there. And in the quiet moment, it jumps back in. And so it's simply let's take that and let's learn how to quiet that because we're allowing it space with purpose. In
mhm,
fact, many times in counseling, we'll just have the people schedule a time to grieve, right? They can take out some photographs because they're grieving all day long, but it's coming out all sorts of sideways, seeping through, or
mm,
they're hiding from it and they're irritable and they're having all this sort of stuff. But if they actually just take a little bit of time, maybe 30 minutes, an hour, and they grieve,
mhm,
all of that quiets. Now they're feeling more peace, more joy, maybe even able to seep in certain places and such. So it absolutely is common for people to fear that. There certainly is a portion that is talking about things, but no more than what's already going on in someone's head. And it's done with purpose to actually help, right? With intention to actually move the person through this process because it matters and because they matter. The person who they lost or the situation that they lost isn't the only thing that matters. It
mm,
is definitely something that matters, but there's also a lot of other things living that. And if you think about what, like, let's use the example of a person, what would they want from you? Most people who are like in hospice care, the last thing they want is people to be stuck in grief. They certainly know that people will grieve, but they want go live life more fully because I was here,
mm.
because I was in your life. Go live life more fully. And grief
And grief
counseling would be
counseling.
more of that. Sorry, that wasn't brief, but it was an important
I all good. I'm learning to let go.
one.
So I do have one more for you, Michelle. Is that a common misconception that we've come across, and I know that I've come across several times, is that therapy will try to fix me or just make the grief go away. Which It's an interesting framing because that notion of the grief going away. But with that being said, what does that prompt inside of you as you think about that?
I want to kind of just come back to what we grieve for a moment, which is we've been talking so much today about death and loss of loved ones and some other losses as well. But sometimes people grieve things that they're not really aware of that they're grieving. Sometimes those could look like things that generally the other people in your life might see as positive. So it's even harder to have those conversations and gain supports from others. Some examples of that might be um, graduating college. Boy, I don't know about y'all, but I know graduating
Mm,
college can be pretty awesome, right? Some college students, they leave and then, wow, but they're missing their friends, they're missing their dorm, they're missing so much about that. And there's this grieving of that, the college life that they had. We think about retirement and we step into our careers after college and we've got retirement plans and we talk about it on an annual basis, even sometimes with our accountants and things like that. But then people sometimes reach that space of retirement. And when people are throwing parties, somehow they notice this rock in their chest. They notice that they're irritable and maybe they're even lashing out to loved ones. So there can be things that we grieve in our lives that sometimes are a little bit unexpected to the folks around us. And that might be one place where it's so helpful to enter a place of therapy to learn how to navigate that and understand how to have conversations with people in your life who might not understand what does it mean to you that you've had this loss, whatever that loss might be to you, because there's only one you. And so I encourage you, gosh, above all things, be thine self, right?
Mm.
So be you, bring you into the therapy session and say, wow, there's this thing and I'm wrestling with it and I'm hurting and talk with us about it. Not let's fix it, but let's talk about it and then let's make meaning of it because it meant something to the college student to be in college. And that's worth looking at. It meant something to have that career that you've had so much success in, that you've given, that you've helped people, that you felt effective in, that one place where you felt maybe you shined and others shined because you were there too in. So let's make meaning and let's take a look at who you were before that loss. And so rather than fixing, I think more we're making meaning and helping make some adjustments from that.
good stuff.
Thank you so much. Now, we're going to be wrapping up and always wanting to make sure that we're giving some very practical takeaways. I think that there was a lot of practical takeaways in this conversation. However, if we wanted to just kind of like fine point some things, what's one thing you want a grieving adult to remember as we wrap up this conversation? And now I'll start off with you, Ali.
The first thing that comes to mind is community. So whether you've gone through grief a million times because you've had a lot of loss in your life, or you had one loss, or you might be experiencing a loss soon. So that there's that anticipatory grief, or it's something in the future that you're worried about. Lean on your community.
Mm,
You are worth being well. You are worth feeling complete. And a lot of times when we isolate ourselves, we can kind of end up drowning. We can feel like we're drowning. And so it's okay to get through those low points. But when you are in those low points, I would really encourage you to find your community. Maybe you haven't found your community yet. Maybe you need to look into support groups, look into reaching out to family, to friends, to colleagues. Community shows up in different ways, but I would very much encourage people to find what community means to them and lean on those people.
awesome. Michelle, any parting shot there on that?
Sure, sure. Don't fear grief. Don't fear it. You will grieve. I hope that each one of us will grieve because when we do, it means something meant a great deal to us. Go through grieving with self compassion and understanding and attending to your memories and everything that meant so much to you.
And Ernie?
Yeah, I'm thinking about something a professor said to me once. He said that all relationships, all things end in one of four ways. Either they leave you leave them, they die, or you die. So, as Michelle was saying, that
Yes.
may we live lives where there are things that mattered. Where, so if we're living a life where things matter, we grieve. right? So may we live a life where that is worth, right, grieving things. Now, that being said, there are many different ways to grieve. So there's no real correct way. Try to do it in healthy ways. If you start to get stuck, honor that, but maybe find some help so you can move through it. There's no way that you're supposed to do this. It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to hurt. We're moving through something. We're moving towards something else, something that we didn't choose, as you said, David. So that's what I would leave is that grief is grief. Don't be alone. Maybe
Yeah.
add that. Don't be alone.
Yeah. And again, I just want to echo this supplemental thought is that sometimes we don't have healthy community around us. We it just is what it is. Not everyone has the right people around them, but you can choose who to have around you. And these episodes are coming to you by not just counselors that are trying to get clients. These are counselors that deeply care about helping people grow and become the best version of who they are. And so, if you need to create community, this is a great way to start is through finding a counselor. Not only these counselors, but counseling. Period. Find a group that can help you through this process. And so, with that being said, I do want to wrap up this episode and leave some parting thoughts here, which is that grief doesn't mean that you're broken. I think sometimes we feel that way, but it doesn't mean that you're broken. And it doesn't mean that you're weak. And it doesn't mean that you're doing life wrong. If grief has changed your world or changed who you are, you don't have to carry that alone. At the Counseling Corner, our counselors support adults through grief and loss with compassion, skill, and respect for your pace and your story. And so, again, I want to present this as an idea that if you're in that right now, as you're listening to this, you don't have to stay there. You can learn more about Counseling Corner at counselingcorner.net or call us at 407 843 4968 to schedule grief counseling in Orlando, Claremont, or Orange City, or via telehealth across Florida. So again, you don't have to stay there if you don't want to. And even if you did, it's worth checking out because you might discover that there's additional life on the other side of it. So if this episode resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone that may be grieving quietly. And if you'd like more conversation like this, subscribe to Real Life Counseling on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people you love. Thank you so much for today. You guys were amazing, Michelle, Ali.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.